Welcome to episode 26 of Published. Today I'll speak with independent sales representative Meg Moster about the process of selling books to independent bookstores.
Welcome to Published, a podcast by Greenleaf Book Group, where we'll discuss the ins and outs of the publishing industry, from writing a book and finding the right publisher to gearing up for a book launch. And now, here's your host, Greenleaf Book Group CEO, Tanya Hall.
Welcome back to Published. In the last episode, we talked about the ways that authors can best promote and sell their books on Amazon. And today we're moving into the brick and mortar world to learn how independent bookstores choose the titles that they want to carry. So though the size and reach of large retailers like Barnes & Noble offer major benefits to authors if you're in those stores, it's important to take into account the huge impact that indie stores can have on book sales as well. Indie stores have also been enjoying a little bit of a blossoming boom in recent years as they've popped up and succeeded in many cities. And because they reflect the cultures of their communities, they've seen a different type of success in the era of Amazon, where customers are looking for individualized, unique buying experiences. So if you or your book have roots in a specific region or focus on a topic that an indie store loves, that store could be a pretty strong partner for you and an advocate to introduce more people to your book. So to go into more detail about the world of independent bookstore buyers, we've brought in Meg Moster, who is one of our longtime independent sales representatives here at Greenleaf Book Group, and she'll talk about what it looks like to pitch and sell a book to an indie retail account. So let's go to the interview. Okay, Meg, welcome to Published.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. I know that we have a lot of questions to cover, so we'll just jump right in. And if you can tell us a little bit about your role as an independent sales rep.
Sure. As an independent sales rep, I'm essentially an independent contractor working for more than one publisher. And like any other publishing sales rep, I meet with buyers at large independent stores, museum shops, national chain retailers, and wholesale accounts, all within my territory, which in my case is the Mid-Atlantic region. And my job involves working with publishers to represent and sell new titles to accounts, discuss author platforms, look at trends, review backlist, and help out with any troubleshooting if and when it comes up. When I meet with the buyers, I present new titles for each of the separate publishers that I represent.
Okay, and how many publishers is that roughly?
For me these days, it's about 30 different publishers, and a wide variety of categories. Not everybody publishes the same type of book, which is a good thing. So it's nice to have a nice variety.
Okay, so you mentioned pitching independent retailers and also a national retailer. How is that different? What are those differences in the pitches?
Well, in the pitches themselves to stores within our territory, the independent stores, in my case, it's the Mid-Atlantic region. I had to think about that for a second. If I have an author that's from Maryland, outside of Baltimore, or somewhere up in New York State, then we certainly focus on the stores in their areas. If it's a national retailer, they have stores obviously all over the country, and in turn we would have authors from different parts of the country, and in some cases different parts of the world. So we may be selling books from authors from San Diego or Portland, Oregon, and we have to make sure the buyers at the regional chains know about those, because that's a big factor in differences. In one case, there other differences have to do with their buying schedules. I'll say independent stores as well as museum shops are visited once or twice a season for regular selling meetings. For larger independent stores, you may add another visit in. In publishing, there are traditionally two seasons. The spring season, which generally goes from February through May, and the fall season from June through January. Although there are quite a few publishers who have gone to a 3-season format, essentially creating a winter season, November through January. National retailers generally you visit once a month. They buy on quite a strict buying schedule, all data for the new titles are required to be in their system 7 months prior to the book's pub date, and titles are presented to the buyers 6 months prior to the pub date. Given the volume of titles that the national buyers are presented each season, this long timeline does help with the budgeting trends and nominating titles for possible promotions, whether it's a holiday or a themed promotion. National chain stores, they have a lot of buyers, where independent stores might have the owner is the buyer, or they might have one or two, and in some cases for the larger independent stores, they might have upwards of 6 or 7 different buyers. But when you go to a national chain, there could be upwards of 20 adult buyers plus another 6 or 7 children's buyers. And they all have a variety of categories that they handle. For instance, one buyer might buy art, architecture, design, and gardening, and another business, education, parenting, and transportation. So there's differences there. You sort of not bounce from one buyer to another, but you don't see one buyer in a day. You see several buyers at the national level.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So a lot of our listeners are probably folks who are venturing out into the publishing world on their own. Perhaps they're trying their hand through the self-publishing route and have an interest in getting their book into retail stores. So would they have more luck pitching directly to independent retailers in their major home market or chain retailers? Where are they best set up for success?
Well, that's an interesting question, I think, because it's a little bit of both, honestly. However, as you mentioned, their hometown independent stores. An author might have more luck with the independent store, especially if they're a first-time author. They're most likely to have a local following, and word of mouth certainly helps. They know a lot of people within the community. They know shop owners, retail owners, their local librarians. So on that level, sometimes they do have sort of a leg up on the chain stores. But when you do present to a chain store, you make sure they know where the author's hometown is. If they have any of their stores within a relative distance, they'll certainly try their best to bring those books into that store too.
And what should they be prepared to deal with in terms of the terms that an indie, let's say, would require as far as discounts and returnability? I think this is often, it's certainly a leading question because it's often an area where authors are blindsided by what it takes to sell into retail.
True. I imagine they certainly are, because it's publishing is different than a lot of other types of retail where their returnability is sort of a key factor for the publishing industry. So general terms for an independent store is about 45% returnable books. The books would be returnable, and 47% if they opt for non-returnable discount terms, although a lot of stores don't generally do the non-returnable route. Mm-hmm. Because the independent stores aren't particularly large, all things considered. So not having the ability to return books doesn't always work for them in terms of shelf space. And one of the keys for independent stores is they do love free freight, which not all publishers have the ability to offer. But they certainly do enjoy that, because freight charges can get quite high and can be a reason sometimes a smaller store doesn't buy directly from a publisher. They might choose to go through a wholesaler instead.
Yeah, and that whole conversation about returns, of course, is one that we have here all the time as well, with authors just educating them. Mm-hmm. And I always remind them, if not for the returnability, you might not ever have the chance to get into the store. So it's a double-edged sword. It creates some accounting headaches, and it basically makes us a consignment business, but that is why they can take chances too.
You're right. You're exactly right. And like I said, and as you just said, it's kind kind of hard to wrap your mind around sometimes for people. Well, that they can, the store has the ability to return because it is different from so many other industries. But again, like you said too, it gives them an opportunity to get in there in the first place.
Yeah. So let's go back to pitching our local independent bookstores as our scenario. You mentioned the strict timelines for the national chains, which certainly I'm familiar with. What sort of timeline can an author expect if they decide to pitch their hometown store? What optimal timeline would they approach them on?
Well, as I said, we work on specific seasons. For spring season, fall season, and again, sometimes a winter season, depending how a publisher decides to break up their list, I'll say. But the buyers expect to see sales reps regularly, January through the beginning of May, and then again, late June through the end of October, certainly. The timeline, they don't need nearly as much lead time from sales reps as the national chains do, unless it has to do with holidays, summer, or back to school titles. And holiday buying is typically done several months prior to the holiday, not just the December holidays, but Valentine's Day, 4th of July. Halloween's actually a big book buying time too. So those are all. It is interesting, yes. There's a lot of Halloween books out there, and they're bought every year. Mm-hmm. But those books are usually bought from independent stores, certainly 2 to 3 months they like prior, so they can work out their budget and their spacing and that kind of thing. But as I said, they don't need the extensive lead time generally that the chains do.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And again, staying with the indie book buyers, of course, we all hear over and over, and you've heard on this podcast, the importance of developing a platform and not neglecting a publicity component to a book launch. But how important is that in the indie buyer's decision? And we know some of it has to do with, I suppose, the regionality of that author and that title. But is the publicity and platform aspect of it as important there as it is in the national chains, or is it more content focused for them?
I'm going to have to say both, really. Book content is always important and essential information to convey to a buyer. Selling and staff recommendations, getting to know their customers are a big part of any bookstore, but very specifically the independent store. If a buyer knows their customers well, they will know if a title will sell and how well it will sell to their customers. But the author platform is always in the front of the buyer's mind too. If the author has a large social media following, if they hold events in the area, how well their previous titles have sold. But indies, as I call them, the indies are pretty well known for giving first-time authors a really nice chance too. So that's great.
Mm-hmm. That is great. Might make it a good place to start for sure. Cover design. We always tell people that everything your mother told you was wrong, and people do judge a book by its cover. So how much of an impact? How much of an impact does that really have on the book buyer? And by that I mean the person making the buying decision for the retail stores. How much does that play into their decision-making process, and is that maybe even a more genre-loaded thing? Is that more relevant for fiction, for instance, than business titles? Or can you speak to the importance of cover design?
Cover design is important. It doesn't convey what the content is truly. A buyer will definitely question that. It really doesn't matter which category it is, to be perfectly honest. But if you're explaining what the content is and they look at the cover and they say, it doesn't match, it doesn't make sense, I don't understand. I don't like the cover or I love the cover. I mean, I'd love to hear that, obviously. Mm-hmm. But a wants the book cover to draw people in. So they pick up the book, they literally touch it, they feel it, they turn it over in their hands, they look at the cover again. And that's what you want. And when I go into bookstores, no matter what kind of stores they are, I see customers doing that. And I love to see them do that, because that they're really giving that book the time and the thought, and you can just see it on their face. And it's a really interesting thing to see, to watch the customers do that. But I will say that sales reps are fairly well known for giving their advice about cover design, because of the experience we have with buyers historically, and how they react to them also. As you said, buyers, reps, customers, they always judge the book by a cover. And that'll hold true for a long time, I think.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I can certainly vouch for what you said about publishers going to sales reps for feedback on covers, because we do that with you.
Yeah, but it's experience that we've had dealing with the buyers who are dealing with their customers. So it's a nice sort of trail of people that, and it's all helping. Honestly, it's not a criticism. It's not saying, well, I just don't like it. We're doing everything we can to help the author get their book on a shelf or on a table somewhere, and then into the customer's hands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's more of a collaboration. I would agree with that. And you are always great at giving us some advice, and I think often just helping us make a decision as to whether something in its current state has legs for retail. All right, so final bit of advice again for our listener who is probably orienting towards starting with their independent bookstores. Any parting advice you would give to that author who wants to distribute first into that channel outside of what you've already covered?
Mm-hmm. Honestly, I would say have patience. And that's have patience with the process of creating a book. And if you're going that route, finding a publisher, an editor, have patience with the independent stores and their customers, but overall have patience with yourself. Give yourself time to create a book that is well-researched, creative, edited, re-edited, publicized, sold, and enjoyed. I mean, write a book if you enjoy the art of the process. Please do. It can be an incredible experience.
I can speak to that. Yes, ma'am. It's definitely an incredible experience.
Yeah.
And something worth celebrating.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Meg, thank you so much for your support of Greenleaf Book Group, and of course for your time today and all of this great information that you've shared with our listeners. I really appreciate your time.
Great. Thank you very much for having me.
That's it for our episode today. We hope you learned a lot and are encouraged to try to sell your book into independent bookstores. For notes and resources from today's show, go to greenleafbookgroup.com/episode 26. You can also find advice for writing, publishing, and promoting your work in my book, Ideas, Influence, and Income, which you can learn more about at ideasinfluenceandincome.com. If you've enjoyed our show, please rate and review us on iTunes. It means a lot to have your feedback and will certainly help us make sure we're answering your most burning publishing questions. We'll be back next month with another new episode.
Thanks for listening to Published. To learn more, please visit greenleafbookgroup.com. And remember to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes.